All right, first up, Light Mirror. This is really low on the list only because, like, while this card is crazy, it stops fairies, it stops Lightsworn, right? That's kind of it. Like, you can side it against Raikou Caius decks, maybe, to stop the Raikou part of it. And it does a really good job at the thing that it does, but it's just very narrow. That's why it's kind of fallen off. Similar to a couple other cards on this list that are starting to see a little bit less play. Light Mirror just kind of isn't enough. If your local meta has Lightsworns, if it has fairies, if you just auto lose to fairies, right? This is definitely something that you would consider. But in general, this is just not a super versatile card. And so because of that, it can't really stick super high on the list. All right, Mask of Restrict. Very simple card, very old card. So similar to Light Mirror, it kind of just does what it does really well, right? It can be good against Lightsworn in a way because they can't Celestia. You know, that's a big part of how they gain advantage. It can be okay against Blackwings. They can't Icarus attack, right? They can't Tribute for Sirocco. But let's be real. The main reason that you're running this is for frogs. This is a frog hate card, and it does what it does amazingly. They cannot tribute at all. They can't tribute for Substitute. They can't tribute for Caius, Ryza, Dark Dust Spirit. They can't even tribute for Soul Exchange. They can't tribute for all of the things. I'm trying to think of Enemy Controller. That's the one I was thinking of. Their whole deck revolves around tributing, and outside of Dupe Block, you know, if you get this out after Dupe Block, you know, it doesn't really do a whole lot. They can sit on that for a while, but man, this card just wins against frogs. Pulling the Rug. Man, there's a reason this card has just been sticking at $10. I mean, it's only had 2 printings, and they're really old, but still. This card hits a lot of decks. It's almost like the opposite of the previous 2 entries, right? It does what it does really good. It hits cards that activate on summon. So all of your Monarchs, your Stratos, your Deep Sea Diva. There's so many cards. Blizzard. There's probably at least one card you could name in every single deck that this card hits. It's a counter trap, so it's hard to get around. They have to solemn it or trap stun ahead of time or whatever, right? So this card just hits a few niche cards, but unlike the other 2 cards where the other 2 cards hit a few niche decks, this hits a few niche cards in most decks. Almost every deck has something this card hits. So it's a very versatile side card. You can put it in your side deck and know that it's going to get use over a tournament. Vanity's Fiend. So we got a Dark Christia that's a little bit easier to get out in certain ways. This card is just overall decent, right? It's 1 tribute, it's got the Monarch stats, it locks out a lot of decks, but it's not as easy to get out. It's the reason why Frogs also runs it, right? Any deck that runs Caius can run this as well. Now, it's a little bit more narrow because there are a lot more decks that can out this card than could out a Christia, right? 2400 and 2800 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a pretty big difference. So you just kind of have a lot of matchups that it's really hard to come back from. If you pull this off against Quick Draw, you pull this off against Frogs, you pull this off against Zombies, there's not a lot they can do in those matchups. However, this card, like Christia, you do have to be a little careful with. You can't just willy-nilly attack this thing, right? It can be bottomless, it can be deprisoned. So it doesn't have any protection, so you have to stick it and keep it on the field. All right, Cyber Dragon. Man, what is bad about Cyber Dragon here? Okay, so Cyber Dragon, 2100 free special summon, right? Big beater. It's good against Blackwings for that reason, right? It gets over almost all the Blackwings, you know, minus Kalut and Synchros, right? It's good against machines, right? You can Chimera attack any machine monster you can't deal with, you know, giant ancient gear monsters, Machina Fortress, Catastor, any of those things, right? So even as a monster and just as an easy out to machines, they're both good. It just has so much going for it. And, you know, decks that run Gale, you can special this normal Gale, and that's a level 8, right? And decks that run Plague, you special this, you stack for Plague, that's a Black Rose nuke, and you haven't normal summoned yet. There's just so much versatility to this card. Now, I will say, this card is seeing a little bit less play, but I'm not really sure why. A lot of people seem to be saying that, like, machines aren't as relevant, but as I mentioned before, it's just good as a beater in a lot of matchups. Nobleman of Crossout, one of the few spells that I have on this list. So as Frazier put it in his recent tier list, spells just aren't super great side deck cards a lot of the times. They're just a little too slow for like monster effects and just relevancy, right? This card stands above the rest in that. So not only obviously is Edison format a bit of a Raikou Caius format, but on top of that, right, not only will this hit your hamsters and your Raikous in this Raikou Caius format and banish all of them, right? If your opponent early game has to set a Treeborn Frog and you activate this, it's banished, right? If your opponent, you're playing against zombies and your opponent's playing, all of the recruiters in the world, right? Same with fairies. It's an easy out to destroy recruiters, right? Not to mention it pairs very well with Book of Moon. If there's any monster you can't deal with, an Armor Master or whatever, you can Book of Moon it and Nobleman of Crossout it. There's just a lot of synergies in the format, and it hits a lot of these slower decks. I think we all could have guessed what the top two are, and since you see this, I bet you can probably tell me what the final one is. So deck Devastation Virus. Man, if your deck can support this, you are at least side decking 2, if not side decking 3, or even main decking one of them. I noticed a lot of decks are starting to do that. This card wrecks frogs, quick draw. It hurts zombies quite a bit. It destroys fairies. This card just has so much versatility. On top of that, even if you're main decking it and it's a matchup that it's not great against, talking about Blackwings or whatever, you can make a Catastor, set this, pass, your opponent summons their Shura, attacks into you. They have Kalut, right? Deck Dev, bam, Kalut is gone, especially if you have a second monster that they're attacking into. It's even better, right? It hits so many cards in so many decks to the point that, yeah, you might not side deck this against every deck, but it hits cards in everything. It hits every major strategy, and you get to see their hand for 3 turns. Man, this card is good. All right, Different Dimension Crow. DD Crow, man. I mean, I feel like you guys could have seen this coming a while away, and if I had a decent picture to post as the thumbnail for this video, I probably would have put Crow on it. Man, this card, I don't know why it's seeing a little bit less play right now. People are kind of going split between this and Soul Release, and Soul Release has its merit, but man, this card stops so many plays. This card stops Vayu, it stops Plague, it stops so many different strategies in the main deck. If your opponent hasn't set their graveyard up properly, it just completely fizzles out a Miracle Fusion. Blizzard, it hits so many decks. It wrecks completely stuff like frogs, stuff like zombies, completely stops their game plan. You can even main deck it in some decks to be able to modulate Graveyard for Dark Arm Dragon, and Quick Draw can loop it. I think we all saw this card coming, and this is why it is a staple in side deck format in Edison.